Alright, how'd all that look?
Good, but what are we doing this for?
I'm gonna be talking about Donkey Kong Country, and I want to get some footage of me, like, monkeying around, because Donkey Kong's a monkey.
Dude, he's an ape.
He's what?
An ape?
Is there a difference?
Yes.
Donkey Kong Country is a platformer game developed by Rare that was released for the SNES on November 18th, 1994. Featuring 40 levels of platformer action, DKC is widely regarded as one of the greatest, most influential platformer games of all time. The game was also praised for its visuals, which made use of pre-rendered 3D graphics, which pushed the SNES to the edge of what it was capable of.
With all the love that this game receives, you think that anyone who calls themselves a gamer would have beaten it hundreds of times over.
Well, I haven't, but today that's going to change. On to level 1. The very simple plot of Donkey Kong Country is that King K. Rool has yoinked every last one of Donkey Kong's bananas from his stash, and DK and Diddy,
the Kong, not the other guy,
head out to chase him down. Across 6 worlds with 5 to 6 levels each, Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong jump, cartwheel, ride mounts, and collect bananas on their quest to stick it to King K. Rool.
Upon first starting this game up and beginning to play it, 2 things stood out immediately.
This game looks amazing and sounds pristine as heck. Every pre-rendered 3D sprite absolutely shines against very detailed backdrops. Throughout the game, you'll see jungles, swamps, caves, icy mountains, random temples, and probably my favorite areas of the game, the underwater segments. Each of these areas look stunning. The pixel art versus realistic graphics debate has gone on for ages, and will go on until the day the Earth stops spinning. But it's an indisputable fact that pixel art games age better than realistic ones. Look at a realistic game from the PS3 era, then look back at Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. These graphics are timeless, ageless, and still hold their own today. There are these weird gray pixels on the sprites, but I'm sure on the original hardware running on a CRT, they weren't noticeable at all. Even in this playthrough on the Nintendo Switch Online service, I wasn't bothered by the individual pixels on the sprites. When in motion, they're hardly noticeable anyway.
The music of Donkey Kong Country should be studied, praised, and put in a museum.
David Wise composed most of the music for the game, originally thinking his work was a placeholder for future Koji Kondo tracks. Once his role was finalized, Wise made use of some samples specifically optimized to work with the SPC 700 sound chip that the SNES utilized. Later in his career, David Wise would collaborate with Grant Kirkhope and Steve Burke to create the music for Yooka-Laylee, a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie developed by a handful of ex-Rare folks.
I'm not exaggerating when I say that there is simply not a bad piece of music on the game's soundtrack. What a masterclass of auditory expertise.
From the minute you start the game up until the end of the credits roll, there is nothing but excellent music playing.
I think my favorite song from this game is a 3-way tie between the title theme, the underwater song Aquatic Ambiance, and the final boss theme, Gangplank Galleon.
The title theme is simply a fantastic way to get the player excited for the game ahead of them. I can only describe this beat as funky, and I'm sure that's an adjective that the song would be proud to have, if songs could have feelings. The backing drumline accompanied with what sounds to me like a 16-bit saxophone come together so amazingly. On the complete opposite side of the music spectrum, we have Aquatic Ambiance. The song that plays during the game's water levels is haunting and distant, with a depth, no pun intended, that is unmatched by any other song in the game. It truly feels like I'm underwater listening to this song, with the reverb and subtle backing notes hitting in just the right ways.
You know that ambient sound you hear when you're underwater in a deep swimming pool? That sort of rumbling sound that comes from the sheer amount of water above you? Aquatic Ambiance feels like that.
In a lot of platformer games with underwater levels, the score goes for a more upbeat, floaty, lively tone. That works, sure, but it doesn't impact you as much as the alternative angle that Aquatic Ambiance goes for. It definitely helps that the levels themselves mirror the aesthetic as well, going for a darker, deep sea motif over something brighter. I seriously love the water levels in this game, and that's not something I can say when talking about most other platformers. Gangplank Galleon, the theme for the final level and final boss fight, is a high-tempo, pirate-like shanty that gives way to a climactic tune that reminds me a lot of the title theme.
I mostly like this song for the first part, the bit that sounds a bit like Sea Shanty 2 from RuneScape, but the rest of the track isn't bad either.
I'm not entirely sure why the final boss or its theme have any pirate influence on it at all, but it's cool.
Unfortunately, the entire game is not cool.
I know a lot of people love this game, and it was good enough to spawn an entire series in and of itself, but Donkey Kong Country has some exceptionally low lows from a gameplay and game design perspective. I went into my playthrough with very high expectations, and I feel significantly let down.
Don't misinterpret my criticism of certain parts of the game as me saying the entire thing is bad or unplayable, but I think it's fair to say that some parts aren't designed very well.
For example, I can't count the amount of times I lost a life in this game because an enemy popped out of nowhere. I'd just be platforming, minding my own business, when an armadillo would roll in out of nowhere and snuff out poor Diddy Kong. The only way you'd know to avoid this is if you'd done it before and learned by failing. That is not a challenge. It's just cheap.
There's a difference between games that are difficult and games that are unfair. Donkey Kong Country has perfect examples of both.
A difficult game makes you think, I'm an idiot, when failing. Timing these barrel blasts showcases this very well. The only way you screw this up and die is if you mess up the timing. There's nothing out of your control here, and if something doesn't go right, that's on you. Same thing here. Doing precision platforming and mistiming or straight up whiffing a jump and losing a life is your fault. So these parts of the game are difficult. On the other hand, we have this stage where the screen straight up goes dark while you're trying to complete the level. No rhyme, no reason, no difficulty, just straight up cheap level design. Or what about this level, where again, an enemy just pops out of nowhere from the right side of the screen? The challenge here is to try and put yourself in the mindset of a game designer reaching for the low-hanging fruit, which is a place I try my hardest never to go.
If you're forcing your players to think like a 7-year-old who's making the world's hardest level in Super Mario Maker, you've done something wrong.
There are ice levels in this game too. Honestly, ice is pretty par for the course in platformer games, and they're not all bad, but the physics here are wonky. Watch as Donkey Kong tries to start moving again, but instead finds himself running in place like a bozo. Oh, and if you think you're starting to get the hang of it and the end is in sight, here's a blizzard to obscure the screen even more. Just to clutter things up a little bit, no other reason.
Dying on a level and thinking this stage sucks means it's not a challenge, it's a chore.
The feeling of beating one of these levels is usually, oh gosh, it's finally over, not, oh gosh, I finally did it. And that is a very important distinction.
One final push to try and make my point clearer.
Imagine you were challenged to bake a cake without a recipe, and you could only leave the kitchen once you're done. If you mess up the first cake, no worries, there are plenty of ingredients to go around. Just try again. I'll set out the ingredients you need, just not in the right quantities. And to make things easier for you, I'll also let you know after each attempt what ingredient quantities you got right.
Would you like to try my challenge? Does it sound fun? Or would you rather have all the ingredients pre-portioned out so you can just go through the motions, maybe mixing in something unique here and there as you become more comfortable in the kitchen?
All of these levels are beatable, you just need to do them over and over again. Eventually, you'll commit the level's details to your short-term memory and will throw enough lives at them to complete them. You'll get excited, not because you overcame a roadblock, but because you can finally do literally anything else besides get headaches from a swinging flashlight strapped to a parrot. I think this is why I like the underwater levels so much. They're very well thought out and follow common sense. There's no unpredictable enemy movement, nothing from off-screen that's going to zip by and take a life, just smooth water movement and skill required to evade the enemies and obstacles. There's also the really freaking good music, which may sway my opinion just a teensy little bit.
To be clear, I don't dislike all the hard levels.
Tanked Up Trouble was a really fun puzzle, where you're tasked with finding the most efficient route to keep your ride fueled up. Anytime I ran out of gas and had to restart, I immediately had a new idea how to repath through the suspended platforms. This is in stark contrast to something like Orangutan Gang, where I was sniped by barrels rolling from off-camera that hit me before I could react. Instead of thinking of new, creative ways around the obstacle, I got frustrated that I had to inch through the level, living in constant fear that a barrel would smite Donkey Kong without me having a chance to jump over it.
The game is essentially sucker punching you, and I find that far less fun than a fair back and forth match.
It's a light form of Kaizo Mario, which, in general, is marked by unfair level design.
Reading straight from Wikipedia.
Kaizo Mario is notable for deliberately breaking all standard rules of accepted level design, placing hidden blocks where the player is likely to jump, extremely fast auto-scrollers, and various other traps.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
Thankfully, all of the boss battles are highly skill-based and actually challenging. They all boil down to dodging attacks before the boss opens themselves up to taking damage, and you repeat this a handful of times per boss.
The boss fights aren't repetitive, and they each took me more than one try to get a hang of the timing and patterns.
Finally beating a boss was rewarding, and it felt good knowing I mastered the challenge the game had given me. That feeling was usually short-lived though, since the subsequent stages probably had me doing something stupid, like trying to cartwheel in place to get up to running speed.
How do you get up to running speed in the original Super Mario Bros.?
Right.
In summation, Donkey Kong Country is not a bad game, but I also don't think it's a particularly good platformer when you take everything into consideration.
Yes, the game is visually stunning for the hardware it was on, and the soundtrack is among some of the greatest of its generation. But the level design and other developer choices caused the game to stick out like a sore thumb among its fellow platformers. Wildly inconsistent quality across its levels, enemy and obstacle placement that are explicitly anti-player, and a scarcity of checkpoints are unevenly paired up with fantastic character art, blissful audio, and evident passion, which leads to an extremely mixed taste in my mouth as I walk away from Donkey Kong Country.
The game is not bad, I can't stress that enough, but I do think that a second pass over the entire game could have resulted in a more user-friendly experience.
Instead of DKC working with you to create player enjoyment, there are too many times when it is actively working against you. If you're not someone who grew up with the game but still want to try it out, I'd recommend using the Nintendo Switch Online service. And don't be afraid to use the rewind feature.
If you have good self-control, like if you only use the rewind when the game throws a barrel at you from off camera without any warning, then I think you can play the game the way it should have been designed.
And if you did grow up with the game, you're probably thinking I'm just a soft new age gamer who wants everything handed to him on a silver platter.
I see your insult, and I raise you one AARP insurance plan, since you're probably in need of that these days.
There will still be difficult parts that you'll have to try to overcome, but you won't be forced to suffer through the developer's occasional subpar decision making.
That's enough about Donkey Kong Country for now though. I've still got all that monkeying around footage I need to make use of, and I think I found the perfect video topic. Next time, I'm gonna talk about Monkey Escape. Oh man,